If you've ever tried making your own video game or looked into what it would take to make your own video game, odds are you've heard something like, if you think it'll take 3 months to finish your game, expect it to take 6. Yeah, this 48-hour game jam is gonna be so fun. And then 48 years later, and you're redoing the UI system for the 150th time.
What? When are we gonna get an audience in here? It's been 17 years.
You see so many people start making a game, but so few actually finishing one. And this is totally understandable because building a game from the ground up can be a massive undertaking, especially when you're doing everything yourself, creating all the assets, whether hand-drawn or modeled, all the sound effects and mixing, all the programming that actually bring those things to life. And let's not forget all the time and energy that goes into thinking about what the rules and systems of the game actually are. And honestly, a lot of people aren't totally building their games from the ground up anymore, thanks to extremely accessible engines like Unity and Unreal, asset resources like the Unity Asset Store and the Unreal Marketplace, programming tools that allow creators to design without ever writing code like Playmaker and Unreal's blueprints. Thanks to sites like YouTube and Udemy, you can immediately start learning how to use all of these tools. Distribution isn't much of a problem anymore either, with platforms like Steam and itch.io, where game makers can host their games and share them with the world, and they can name their own prices. It's all just fucking handed to you on a silicon platter, you spoiled little, but don't worry because, I'm in the club too. And yet none of that shit is enough to finish making a game. Clearly, you have all these people who've got all that shit together, but have endlessly shelved projects. Across the world, there are games tucked away on hard drives and will never be shared anywhere else. Why? Why you no finished game, Do you need accountability? No, that can't be it, because consider how many abandoned games have devlogs that are also collecting digital dust on sites like TigSource. How many hashtag screenshot Saturdays there are on Twitter and Instagram for a game that got to the 65% mark years ago, but haven't been touched since then either. And alright, well, fuck you, fine. I'm one of those people. At the beginning of this year, I started working on a VR game that would arcadeify social distancing to flatten the curve. I had a little devlog going on TigSource and got some videos on this YouTube. I got my Steam Workshop account all set up. I even got all my main mechanics set up and working, but I haven't touched it in months. I might come back to it, but right now I've given my attention to a new game. So I think that's what this devlog is. It's a way to answer the question, what decides whether or not a game gets finished? I'm working on a game right now, which I intend on selling on Steam. If I finish it, you can watch this series back and see what it takes to finish a game. And if I don't, then you can watch the series back and laugh at me and tell me how stupid I am and how fucking worthless I am. All the 9-year-olds and people with shitty self-esteem already tell me that because, well, this is the internet.
Why you reading, bitch?
Because I like to read and this is a really good book.
You're a really good bitch, bitch.
Why you gotta bother me, man?
Because I'm not doing very well at school. I'm reading at a 3rd grade level. I really don't want to get left back. So when I see somebody reading for fun, it makes me feel that much more stupid. And then I get mad.
Either way, hopefully this can let people learn from my mistakes, which I will inevitably make. Because sometimes I am fucking stupid. A few months ago, I finally played Portal 2. Yeah, I know, I don't have any excuses, but better late than never, right? And yes, I thought it was really great. I was especially captivated by the characters and the world building, which I think made the uniquely mind-bending Portal mechanic even richer.
If we can store music on a compact disc, why can't we store a man's intelligence and personality on one?
And here's the thing, I have a hard-on for period pieces. And although Portal may take place in the present-ish, the game takes you through the history of Aperture Labs, and so in that way it takes you to what seems like sometime between the 50s and the 70s. I also have a hard-on for Americana. So when an eccentric southern billionaire has a big underground lab, like some kind of Willy Wonka, Disney, Nikola Tesla, I get rock solid, baby. I had really fallen off the wagon for my last game, COVID VR.
2 months, 14 days, and 16 hours. I'm pretty tired. Think I'll go home now.
I just couldn't force myself to work on something that I just didn't have the flame for anymore, you know? So when I was done playing Portal 2, I was inspired to start prototyping some new ideas. The first genre I started getting excited for was espionage. You know, like Cold War era spies. Not so much the James Bond kind, but more of like Munich or Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I was imagining this game where you would chase information around the world, you know, from like Washington DC to England, Paris, and Morocco, Moscow, you know, like eavesdropping on informants and forging documents to sneak into restricted areas and photographing targets and locations, like drilling through a safe to steal documents or using hook shots to scale the side of a building, you know, wearing disguises, you know, like all proper spy shit. And I wanted all those things to be necessary components of solving a puzzle. A puzzle that would require real attention to your scene. A puzzle that would require the player to constantly hold many pieces of information in mind. I had no idea how all of that would come together, so I just started banging out some tests. The first prototype went like this. At the top of the screen there's a timer because originally I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be a spy speedrunning game. There would be 3 rooms with balconies, and the game would randomly select one of the rooms to put the target in. It would be the player's mission to get in there and steal the documents without being seen. So you could use your hookshot to scale the building and take a peek inside. Then you could swing over to the adjacent room to get to the shared hallway. Here's where you could place Distractobot, a remote-controlled robot with a little wireless monitor. With Distractobot at the door, you could go back to the balcony and use Distractobot to open the target's door, which catches the target's attention, giving you a moment to get inside and put a sleeping pill in the target's drink. So when the target goes back to do their thing, they take a sip and decide to take a nap. That's your cue to get inside to get the documents. But you don't know the code to the safe, so you need to look around. So you find clues in your environment. A receipt for radioactive materials. This receipt also has values that randomly change, specifically the name and date of birth. That's because the date of birth is the only number on the receipt that is used as the password to the safe. So if the player enters the date of birth in the correct order, the safe opens and the documents can be taken. All that's left is to get away, so you hop out of the balcony and get into your getaway car. That cues up a song and disables player movement. The end. So that's one way of playing the level. If you couldn't figure out the code, you could also use the laser cutter, which is this big obnoxious machine that would break the safe open. Thankfully, the sleeping pill makes the NPC knock the fuck out, or else the NPC would hear it. So then I asked a few of my friends to come play the game. I could watch them and see what worked and what didn't. They would give me some notes during the game, and then we would talk about those things when they were done playing. Overall, something I learned is that even for play testing, I need to make things a little clearer. Like in this prototype, you're not prompted with what your mission even is, and so I would end up having to give my friends a little preface before they started playing. The real value of these playtest sessions was in seeing which aspects of the game they enjoyed the most, what they had the most genuine reactions to. Building this prototype helped me in 2 major ways. One, it helped me to learn how to use these tools in what felt like a safe space. I could fuck things up and get messy and not worry too much about it. And that mindset freed me up to experiment with the tools and not hesitate to try different workflows. I usually model all my levels as unique geometry in Cinema 4D, but I didn't want to waste my time tweaking the dimensions of models for a prototype. So I figured it was time to learn how to do some proper gray boxing. I got the free Unity asset MAST, which stands for Modular Asset Staging Tool. It's a tool that lets you build levels based on a grid. It's like Minecraft, but you can use any shape. And you can even load in your own custom game objects. I think for gray boxing this tool is great, and probably even building out your own final levels for certain types of games. For this prototype, I just used it to place a bunch of boxes, Minecraft style. I didn't bother building my own first-person controller and just went with the first-person all-in-one asset, which has all my basic needs for the time being: move around, look, jump, run, and lots of parameters in the inspector that I can control with Playmaker. I knew it would be a simple swap if I wanted to build my own first-person controller later. The first big thing I had to wrap my head around was the stealth mechanics, specifically a vision cone for the NPCs.
Sneaking around gets you nowhere. What if you have to sneak for a friend? You're a sneaking bitch! bitch! Oh!
I had found some free and modest solutions before, but those things didn't really have nearly as much control as I needed. I found a Playmaker tutorial out there on how to build a vision cone, I think using like 2 raycasts and building an angle out of those or something like that. But again, it was just too involved, and I figured there had to be something on the asset store that could do all that upfront heavy lifting and just give me a simple interface to control everything. The first thing I got was Easy AI for Playmaker, which looked promising, especially for. The next solution I found was Sensor Toolkit by mycosmo, which ended up being totally perfect. It has custom Playmaker actions and is a very simple system made up of very easy to understand components, which together gives you tons of control. There's an online manual that is clear and concise, it has pictures and it's well organized. Totally well worth the money. Like, fucking bravo, mycosmo. I would totally recommend this asset. I got it working so that when the player enters the NPC's field of view and there's nothing between them like a wall or something, then the NPC would react accordingly. In this prototype, that just means a game over. And when the NPC would see your remote-controlled robot, they would approach it curiously, but then a moment later go back to what they were doing. In the past, I've had some really janky solutions to sound for my games. Again, my problems thoroughly solved thanks to the asset store. This time, my savior would be Master Sound AAA Sound. The written learning resources are good, but I do wish they had video tutorials. I would highly recommend this asset. I had some idea of how I might use Master Audio in a more advanced way for the actual game, so using it for very basic things in this prototype was a very useful experience. Other major way that this prototype helped me was in finding out what kind of game I actually wanted to build. Because when this was done, I realized something pretty major. I really did not want to build a game that was so like on the rails. To be that predictable for me as the designer to play. It helped me realize that the kind of game I really want to design is one in which I could play and even as the designer still be surprised. You know, I thought randomizing some things here and there would be enough, but it wasn't satisfying. And that's when I started to do more research into systemic game design and procedural generation.
I'm Tarn. I make Dwarf Fortress. It's a way for the developer to surprise themselves. I mean, it's completely kind of selfish or whatever, but that's the reason we do it. But then the surprise. I mean, people that play the game, they can be surprised too and play it over and over and over. And see new things every time, and it's I mean, just sitting and writing a kind of scripted story. It's hard to play that kind of game yourself.
All right, so I saw this panel and heard all these things said that resonated so deeply with me. I come from film, a medium that's inherently like on the rails. You know, it's like in a fixed state, which is only really made different by the perspective its viewer chooses to experience it under.
And you can actually discover things like other games where everything is placed by hand. You know, you're discovering a thing that the designer specifically did, but with a procedurally generated game, you can make like a real discovery that nobody knows.
My interest in games is in the medium's unique quality. It is a system of ever-moving and changing parts, and for me, when it's at its most exciting is when there are emergent qualities. In case you don't know, an emergent quality is something that happens in a game that was never intended to happen, never designed on purpose, but is instead just the result of all the intentional systems interacting with each other. An example I love is one I found on Twitter years ago. An indie dev had built a functioning solar system. He programmed all the planets and the moons to orbit each other and the sun to be a light source. So at one point while playing his own game, he was surprised to witness a lunar eclipse. He never intentionally programmed the eclipse to happen. It was just a result of his systems running and interacting. So yeah, I'm all stoked on the idea of making a systemic game, maybe to some degree procedurally generated, but that meant completely rethinking what the game was. For the second prototype, I started thinking about the most important part of espionage, information, also called intelligence or intel. The who's, what's, when's, where's, and why's that spies so deeply concern themselves with. How this information is distorted and hidden. So that's when I had the idea of creating procedurally generated breadcrumb trails. One clue that would lead to the next, and then to the next, and so on and so forth. But it couldn't just be a series of simple and obvious keys that tell you exactly what to do next. I wanted clues to require interpretation. Like finding a bloody gun and remembering that someone in a photo had a splatter of blood on their shirt.
You got red on you.
And I wanted there to be several degrees of separation between each clue, so it wasn't just like hopping from one to the next, but instead required you to think back to 2 clues ago to make sense of your current one. So I drew all sorts of diagrams and visual representations of these systems in the most abstract way, just so I can understand how I might start taking them from abstractions like letters and numbers and into tangible things like people, places, and things. This is when I started considering using spreadsheets to organize the mounds of data that I would have to create, which felt a little crazy, but it also felt like it made the most sense. I would later find out that this is exactly how the developers of Watch Dogs 2 designed their AI. Thousands of lines of dialogue in Left 4 Dead were also organized in something like spreadsheets. I also considered CSV files in JSON, which I spent a few days learning the basics of and learning how they work within Playmaker. I eventually got a basic mission builder working. And honestly, I would really love to go more in depth on it because it's so fascinating how a narrative can be generated by merely linking people, places, and things. But I'm keeping that one in my back pocket. I feel like it would make a good detective game. I guess this is a good point to tell you that although exciting, this prototype was also abandoned. The thing was, there were just too many handcrafted things needed. Too many things I would have to intentionally design. Again, the game was not systemic enough. As I sat in front of a spreadsheet, tasked with filling in some hundreds of boxes with completely unique ways to link each of these items, I realized it may be easier to just develop systems that made these links automatically. I shouldn't have to go in and hand program every item to get wet with water. It should just be that water plus item equals wet item, automatically. So I got back to the drawing board. And I mean that literally like a drawing board. Okay, so the third prototype. I busted out some big ass paper, some markers and scissors, and I just started creating my assets. The player, the NPC, agents, and my new guiding force, the mole. I blocked out spaces for each of the cities that I wanted to take the player. I started shuffling things around and brainstorming what a game might look like if the central goal was to expose a sleeper agent in your agency, a mole. It's a little like Counter-Strike if both teams were terrorists and the bomb planting and defusing was a little bit more elaborate. This time I decided I would really flesh out what the gameplay was before I got to prototyping. I made a brand spanking new Trello board and started organizing how I might organize my actual game project. This way, when it was ready, I could just hop over to Unity and have a clear roadmap of what needed to be built first and how things related to each other. I think this approach will save me tons of time. And it's super intuitive and engaging. It's fun to make these little paper games while filling in a Trello board. At some point back when I was in the middle of that second prototype, I started building a refined version of the stealth system to include taking off your shoes to move around more stealthily, opening and closing doors slowly to make less noise. AI now responds to sounds like your footsteps, and if they can't see you, they go to one of the last places that they heard you make a noise, and they react differently depending on whether or not you're intruding in their space. I finally hit all the limitations of that first-person all-in-one asset and had to build my own first-person controller. I also started building my own custom modular level pieces and have gotten down a decent system. That being said, I started using generic room pieces to build out the rest of the levels just so I can focus on programming right now, and then I'll create more of those custom pieces later. I also did some online multiplayer tests because the deeper I got into this new version of the game, the more I saw how fun it would be to play with friends. Creating online multiplayer games is surprisingly approachable. It's still a fucking doozy, but approachable. Most recently, I whipped up a day and night system linked to the in-game time. That was such a mindfuck. It took me a few days to lock that one down. I started by creating a digital style clock with the numeric readout for hours and minutes. That was easy enough to get to work, but I was having trouble linking the time inextricably to the orbit of the sun. a directional light in the game. I eventually realized that not only would I prefer the game to have an old school analog clock where you would have to look at the hands to read the time, but it would also be easier to link the day and night cycle to that kind of clock because it's a much simpler system. You know, since both the hands on the clock and the sunlight are based on rotation. So now I have this awesome little dial that lets me control the time of day. The reason I did this was because I had to make sure I could program this, or else I would have to make some pretty big changes to how the game was actually played. So it was a huge moment of relief when I finally got this working. What this means is that the game can have appointments at specific times, and you could meet somebody at a specific time. And in specific time zones across different countries in the game. These cities, by the way, are little microcosms of cities. They're not huge, sprawling open worlds. This project is already, big enough as is, and last thing I need is to single-handedly model and texture 6 distinct cities any bigger than a couple blocks. That needs to stay small. And that's where I'm at right now. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you got some useful information out of this, and if you didn't, then I hope you at least got a laugh out of this, and if you didn't, well then fuck, I'm sorry. I'll try harder next time. Also, I wanted to tell you that Playmaker is on sale right now on the Unity Asset Store. They're not paying me to say this. This is totally just on my own accord. They don't even know I'm saying this. What's up, Hutong team? Hutong? Also, there still aren't enough submissions in the survey, that poll that I was taking for when to do the live streams, so that's still going to be on hold until more people submit what times work for them. I was also thinking about doing a little something special for 666 subs, like a Q&A or something. There's a bunch of questions that I haven't answered in the last month or so I could take all those and add them on to some new questions if you guys want to leave some questions in the comments, and I'll make a Q&A video. Also, I hope everybody is hanging in there. I know these winter months are pretty tough with COVID and everything. For my fellow Americans, things are looking up a little though, because the next 4 years of our lives aren't going to be run by some narcissistic crook as our president. So I think that's nice. That's a direction worth looking forward to.